You ever look at something that we enjoy every day, something that we actually just are so used to we never consider its beginnings? You ever look at something and you think, who in the hell came up with that? I usually think of that when I think about a really good recipe, something that I really like to eat, something that I like to make, or something I like to get at a restaurant, and something that is absolutely delicious. And I find myself wondering, who came up with like that mixture of ingredients to put together and make this delicious dish? I mean, how much trial and error was involved in figuring that out? Same thing with like the alcohol we drink. I mean, how did we figure out wine? Obviously, we know that we can get juice from grapes, but did we know that we could ferment it and do all that kind of stuff? How did we figure that out? Did we let it sit for too long, and then we smelled it and we're like, oh my god, it smells so bad. Wait, hold on. Whoa! Okay, you know, I have to wonder how that first happened and how it progressed into what we know and enjoy today. Your guess is as good as mine. Obviously, it would behoove us to consult history books and different texts and information that would tell us how these things got started. I mean, we can never really exactly pinpoint where certain things began, like the creation of wine and other fermented drink that we enjoy, like beer, whiskey, etc., etc. We know how it's made today, but we don't know where it started being made. And the same thing goes for cigars. Now, tobacco has a long and rich history, dating back as far as we know to the 10th century, which is one of the earliest recorded depictions of someone smoking, well, tobacco leaves, as opposed to what would become the modern cigar. But it's crazy to think how this got discovered. I mean, how did they know how to let the leaves sit out and age and ferment? And how did they know how to do what they did with them? It boggles the mind, but it's a fascinating subject nonetheless. So today I'm going to kind of give you a brief and condensed history on what eventually evolved into the modern cigar today. So if you're unfamiliar with tobacco history and what would eventually evolve into the modern day cigar, this should be interesting, and I hope you'll stick around. So in any case, let's cue that music, and we're going back in time. Too much? Yeah, always too much. Anyways. What's up, everybody? You are watching Dad Smoking Cigars, sponsored by StokeyLives.com, Cigar Social Media, and of course, Casa Cuevas Cigars. From our Casa to yours. Thank you for joining me for this new Friday video. I'm actually recording this video on the 4th of July, and I think it's very fitting that not only am I smoking a Founders Cigar Company, Ben Franklin, Connecticut, but I'm going to be delving into some history. Not necessarily American history, even though I do touch on that and it's involved. I'm going to be talking about cigar history. Now, cigar history starts with tobacco history, which there's a certain point when you go far back enough that things become a little bit hazy, a little bit unclear, and we don't know exactly when the practice of smoking tobacco actually started. While it is not exactly known how far back smoking tobacco was practiced, the earliest known recorded depiction of smoking tobacco was found in Guatemala. It's a piece of pottery that depicts an ancient Mayan puffing on tobacco leaves held together by string. That's right, folks, they used string to hold their tobacco leaves together because they hadn't figured out all the fancy schmancy wonderful ways that we hold together our cigars today. And if you're curious how far this dates back, I mentioned this in the intro of the video, this dates back all the way to the 10th century. That's right, folks, only 900 years into what we considered the Common Era, or after Christ, or however you decide to, label the modern calendar. Only 900 years into that era was this depiction created. For all we know, it could have been happening long before that, but I suppose we'll never truly know. But we do have the Mayans to thank for this wonderful little luxury. And so far as, historians have said, there's a number of theories as to why they smoke tobacco. A lot of it is believed to be like a medicinal practice as well as some kind of ritual. In fact, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, Smoking tobacco was actually for a time considered a strictly pagan activity because Christopher Columbus would show up at some point. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and quote-unquote discovered the Americas, more like stumbled onto the Americas, because he was actually trying to head towards India. Hence why the natives of North America were referred to as Indians or North American Indians, however you want to put it. Columbus encountered these natives who had the practice of smoking tobacco, and this is where the beginnings of what would lead to the modern usage of tobacco would actually begin. Columbus would take tobacco back to Spain, but unfortunately it was seen as strictly, as I mentioned before, strictly a pagan practice. In fact, for a time, smoking tobacco was actually punishable by imprisonment. This is probably largely to do with the fact that Spain was a Catholic country, very much under the influence, and anything that might be related to or remotely connected to paganism was very much a no-no. Thankfully, it wouldn't be much later, in about 1495, that smoking became an acceptable practice in Spain. Not only would it become an acceptable practice, but an entire industry was built around tobacco, to the point where Sevilla, Spain, is actually considered the birthplace of the modern cigar. Tobacco began to spread throughout Europe beyond Spain. They would end up in the hands of a certain French gentleman by the name of Jean Nicot. Nicot introduced the practice of smoking tobacco to France, and we actually get the word nicotine from his last name, N-I-C-O-T, nicotine, from Jean Nicot. So I found that to be an interesting bit of trivia. You learn something new every day. Naturally, it spread from there to England, and apparently the first recorded instance of an Englishman smoking tobacco was a sailor whose name is unknown, and he I guess you could trace back retrohailing to this guy because he figured out how to blow smoke through his nostrils, and it was quite the sight to see. See, I can do it too. You're not special. Spain would try to keep a monopoly on tobacco production, and it would actually move tobacco production over to Cuba, which, for those of us having the benefit of hindsight, should surprise no one. But even if you have given a cursory look at history or paid moderate attention, you would know that that's what happened. That Spain took tobacco from the Americas to their home country and then moved it back towards the Americas in Cuba, an island that Columbus had claimed for Spain during his travels. Tobacco production was moved to Cuba nonetheless, and that is where cigars began to be manufactured. Instead of Spain producing them, the Cubans took over, and obviously that is where we end up getting the wonder that is Cuban cigars. And I have to wonder what it was like during that time, trying like the first Cuban cigars, how amazing, or maybe not so amazing, from the first, attempts at rolling that tobacco while it was there. But the rich soil there would provide some of the best cigars ever smoked by mankind. And today it is still a luxury that people love to partake in, obviously. And I've smoked a number of Cubans myself. I have my own opinions regarding Cubans. They can be hit and miss for me, but I can only imagine what they were like back then. Initially, Spain only wanted the cigars produced for just Spain themselves, but eventually it became too much of an export and too much of a money-making opportunity for them to ignore, and so they began producing cigars that would be distributed worldwide. The 19th century saw a huge surge in popularity of cigars, so much so that in the Western world, including the Americas and Great Britain, cigars were sought after by many, and it was seen as kind of a status symbol of, luxury and even wealth, but it was enjoyed by everyone from the wealthy to the middle class, and it continued to increase in popularity. And as Cuba began producing more cigars, they became even more sought after, and they wanted the finest Cuban tobacco that could be found. In the US, around 1860 and beyond, factories began to pop up around the country, particularly in New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. One of the first factories was built in Conestoga, Pennsylvania. Conestoga is significant because that is where we get the term stogie from, because of the cigars produced in Conestoga. Conestogie, stogie, there you have it. And from that point on, you have a plethora of very famous men throughout history who enjoyed cigars, like Mark Twain, Ulysses S Grant, Winston Churchill, to name just a couple. And Mark Twain can be famously quoted as, "If there are no cigars in heaven, I will not go there." And then Ulysses S Grant, who was an avid cigar smoker. Unfortunately, he had a very unhealthy habit of smoking cigars, in that he would smoke way too many, as opposed to like maybe a couple a day or a few a day, which I think is probably where you should cap it off, if I'm being perfectly honest. Mr. Grant decided to enjoy dozens and dozens of cigars a day. In fact, after the Civil War, he was gifted 10,000 boxes of cigars, if the report that I read is to be accurate. 10,000 boxes of cigars that were left after a certain area, and I don't know what specific area, was kind of left basically deserted and desolate, and those cigars were left behind, and they were gifted to him after, the war was over. So he had plenty to smoke after a while. Now, I can't remember if it was 10,000 cigars or 10,000 boxes. It could be either one. I admittedly did not fact check on that, but it was a story that I read some time ago. Suffice it to say, he had a lot of fucking cigars. So there you have it. Fast forward to the 1960s. Obviously, we all know about the U.S. embargo imposed on Cuba, which made it illegal for us to trade goods with Cuba, because they were starting to adopt communism at the time, which was heavily frowned upon. It was not a political movement that the U.S. wanted to associate themselves with. So not only were we not able to get Cuban cigars legally into the country, even though I'm sure there were plenty of people who found other ways and continue to do so until some of the embargoes fairly recently were lifted. But then also there were some of the health concerns regarding smoking were starting to become more serious and much more scrutinized from that point forward. In the early 1970s, cigarette advertising was actually banned on television because, as I said, the health concerns were starting to peak, and they were starting to look at cigarette smoking not as favorably as they had done in years prior. But there was actually some interesting loopholes where, if you were clever, you could advertise your smaller cigars on television, and that wasn't seen as controversial or a taboo as advertising cigarettes on television. As a result, cigar sales quadrupled in between 1971 and 73, so there you have it. Fast forwarding again to the 1990s, and you have a huge boom in cigar sales, where for years cigar sales were dwindling. It wasn't as popular as it had been in years past, again probably due to the fact that there were the health concerns about smoking, and unfortunately I don't think there was enough known about which patterns or usage patterns of smoking and which particular tobacco products used could cause the majority of health concerns, cigarettes mainly. And if you look at the stats today, you will see that the majority of health concerns regarding tobacco, health problems and issues that you develop, are due to smoking cigarettes as opposed to cigars. The majority of cancer instances from tobacco use, cigarettes as opposed to cigars. The majority of cases of heart disease, cigarettes as opposed to cigars. So you kind of see what the difference is, and the fact that cigarettes over the years that went from being natural tobacco to being genetically modified tobacco, and a bunch of additives and chemicals thrown in to make it one dangerous stick to smoke. So again, I think there was a lot of ignorance, and studies hadn't been done yet to show that in regards to cigars, there weren't nearly as many detrimental health effects as there would be over the years people smoking cigarettes. But the 90s saw a cigar boom, and I think that boom has continued from that point on, as I have seen just such an absolutely amazing surge in popularity. More and more all the time in cigars, as I get more involved in the cigar community, and as I mention cigars to friends and family and stuff like that. I have a bunch of friends who have tried cigars because I've suggested it, and apparently I make it look good. Maybe, I don't know if that's a reason, but it's fascinating to some people, and those who haven't tried it and are curious about it, I love having conversations with them about it, so that way they might actually get to try it. So from the 90s on, there was a huge boom in regards to cigar popularity, and I think that boom continues to this day. So there you have it, guys. I really hope that you found all of that interesting. And I hope that, based on the sources that I cited and looked at, that I was able to report some of that interesting cigar history accurately. If I didn't, please feel free to correct me in the comments. I tried to, look through not a crap ton of sources, but ones that I felt were accurate and kind of said the same things in regards to cigar history around the same time. And there was a couple that I used that I believe were accurate, and they were close, and they were very well documented. So I'll list those in the description below, so that way you can check those out. Yeah, I had fun going through that. It was interesting to me, fascinating, and obviously, I mean, I gotta say a big thank you to the Mayans, the great people who lived in this country long before anybody else did, and they were the ones who grew and developed tobacco, and they smoked it, and now we get to enjoy it. So yeah, that's pretty freaking awesome if you ask me. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. If you did, please be sure to like the video. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And yeah, leave some comments below and give me some feedback on this video. I always appreciate it when you guys do, and I always try to reply to every comment I get. So thank you guys again so much. Yeah, hope you're having a great week, and as always, I will catch you in the next one. Why'd you gotta go out on me? Why would you do that?